the stream running. It's not going to be on the homepage, but it is streaming on YouTube. Sorry. No, you're good.
I'll just make that clarification. I thank you everyone for your patience. Just as an FYI, we are now streaming, but for those that are might be navigating on our home page, the stream will not be on our home page. It will instead be only on YouTube only. So if you're able to hear this through audio, please, if you want to see a video version as well as audio, please go to the YouTube page. With that being said, now I'll pass it over to Madam City Clerk, who will give a roll call.
Shelley Dahlquist.
Here.
Sarah Watson Curry.
Here.
Shelley Carlson. Heidi Durand.
Here.
Deb White.
Here.
Larry Seljevold.
Here.
Chuck Hendrickson.
Here.
Steve Lindos.
Here.
And Mayor Jonathan Judd.
Here, let the record reflect again that Madam City Manager Christina Volkers and Assistant City Manager Dan Molly are attending virtually, and Mr. City Attorney John Shockley is present here in chambers as well. Then with that, can we please stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. We'll move on to item number 3, agenda amendments. Are there any amendments to this evening's agenda, Madam City Manager?
No, there have been no changes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you. Then we'll move to item number 4 on the agenda, which is the consent agenda. Seeing that there have been no items taken off consent, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Councilmember Lindos moves approval. Second, Chuck.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? And Madam City Clerk, I'll pass it over to you for a roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Dahlquist.
Yes.
Councilmember Dahlquist, I'm not sure. I think we might have caught the tail end. If you can vote either in the affirmative or...
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Watson Curry.
Sorry.
Yes.
There we go.
Okay.
Durand.
Yes.
White.
Yes.
Seljevold. Seljevold.
Yes.
Hendrickson.
Yes.
Lindos.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries. Then we'll move into the item number 5, which is the approval of the minutes from the April 13th, 2020 meeting. Are there any additions, errors, corrections that need to be made at this time regarding the minutes?
I'll move to approve Deb White.
Okay,
Lindos second.
thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, Madam City Clerk?
Dahlquist.
Yes.
Durand.
Yes.
Watson Curry.
Yes.
White.
Yes.
Seljevold.
Yes.
Hendrickson.
Yes.
Lindos.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries. Move into item number 6, citizens addressing the council. I will defer to Madam City Clerk. Have we received any electronic communication, written communications regarding any citizens that wish to address the council at this time.
Not at this time.
And to your knowledge, no phone calls or anything have came in
No,
for this item?
correct.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to item number 8, which is a continued public hearing for 12th Avenue South, engineering number 20-12-01A, and 6th and 7th Avenue North and 18th and 20th Street North, engineering numbers 20-A2-01B, street improvements. I'll entertain a motion to enter into public hearing at this time.
We don't need
So moved. Hendrickson.
Selgevold, second.
Okay. Okay. Madam, I'm sorry, I was listening to Madam City Clerk because this is a continued public meeting. And then Mr. City Attorney is saying I don't have to have a formal motion to enter to a continued public
Correct.
hearing meeting.
You just need to gavel it back, you're essentially coming back from a recess, so you just gavel back into as chair, back into the public hearing.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Do we need to, as far as the motion that's been seconded?
Yeah, you don't need to vote on it. You probably just want to ask the member who made the motion in a second if they just are okay rescinding their motion.
Okay. So I'll ask that question. I believe it was Councilmember Lindos and Selgevold with the second. Are you both okay with rescinding said motion?
It was actually Chuck with the first, but I'm
Thank you.
fine.
Thank you.
Yeah, I rescind the motion.
Okay, thank you. My apologies on that. Then we'll move on. Mr. Trowbridge.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is the continuation of the public hearing from 2 weeks ago. We gave the presentation at the last hearing, so I'll just summarize. Since then, we held that hearing open because we'd had a couple of typos in the notice that got sent out. So we sent a follow-up notice, and to be on the safe side, we held the hearing open to give people more time just in case there was any confusion. All total for this project, and we've combined, there's 2 separate projects really that we're combining for one. And all total, there was about 1,060 notices that were mailed out, 1,019 for the 12th Avenue project. And for that one, we received about 16 comments, I believe, which is a little less than 2% of the people that had received a notice. And then for the other project, we had 49 notices sent out, and we had 4 comments that we've received on those. And generally, most of the comments were just questions. All of the comments that have been received have been compiled as part of the record and have been provided to the City Council for their consideration. So I guess if there's anything else that you want me to revisit or have any other questions.
Thank you, Mr. Trowbridge. I just want to make sure here, just to note, just for the record, that there were a couple of additional questions that were submitted. I have reviewed those, submitted via email to mayor and council. And then there's also a log that was added. And then just to make sure, and Mr. Trowbridge, you did address those with those citizens that came in after?
So the log that was sent out, yes, all of those we have talked to the people, and our responses, I think, were generally included in that log as well.
Thank you. Does that pose any questions or comments from anyone? Okay. Does any council member have any questions or comments specific to either one of these projects? individually regarding one's on the south side of town, one's on the north end of town. Okay. Madam City Clerk, have you received any electronic communications or phone calls since we've been sitting here this evening?
None at this time.
Let the record reflect, no one has came back who's monitoring the phone calls to alert me that there's been any communication as well. So with that, oh, I spoke too soon. And I should let the record reflect briefly, there was an individual here who arrived minutes before the meeting that did have some questions. We had alerted her that City Hall was closed and that the only way to make those comments were to be either via phone or online. She did have a number of questions. She was going to drive home and call into the line, and I think she had knowledge that the meeting was going to start at 5:45 p.m. It's now 5:52, and we have not received any communications at this time. So I think at this time, unless she's going to call in, I will probably entertain a motion to exit the public hearing at this time.
So moved by Durand.
Got a motion? Is there a second?
Second by White.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Madam Clerk?
And I do just want to state for the record, I did just receive notification that Councilmember Carlson is on the line and is here and present for the meeting. Also, in the roll call should have been City Manager Chris Volkers and Assistant City Manager Dan Molly, who are also on the line. So, back to the motion. Shelley Dahlquist?
I did have my hand raised. If the mayor can see that.
No, I looked and glanced. I did not see your hand raised. Can you test it though, to see if it's working?
Okay, I'll try it.
It is not showing up on my screen. While we're doing that, can all council members test their hand waves to see if they're working? Because Councilmember Dahlquist is not coming up. And if you all are testing your hand waves, none of them are coming up. Yep, I don't see, yep, I got you, Councilmember Carlson. It's not showing. So we have a technological issue on our end where I cannot see any hands that are raised. So don't feel that it's rude. You may have to interrupt me because I can't see your hand. So my apologies, Councilmember Dahlquist. I'll hand it over to you for your question.
To add that I had some people in Ward 1 state that they found these assessments very high, and a lot of them are on limited income, retired, and even though you spread it out over the 20 years, that first year of $800, you have a lot to add to your yearly expense. And that was one of my concerns. I also feel like Ward 1 is assessed many times, and so it's overlaps for the 12th Avenue construction. A lot of people in Ward 1 are going to be hit also. And I know when the 21st underpass is complete, they will also be assessed for that. And I assume when the 11th Street underpass is done, Ward 1's also going to be hit with these assessments. And I would like us to find some alternative way to process this. I just feel like Ward 1 gets hit too many times.
Okay,
MSUM is going to be hit also on this assessment, and they just laid off over 60 people. And a lot of people are not working and concerned about making payments, mortgage payments, rent payments. And so I'm really concerned about having this construction. I know it's not going to be until the fall, but there may be another second wave that we may have. And so that's my concern, is that people are becoming anxious with additional assessments. Thanks.
thank you. Madam City Manager, I do see your hand up. Yours is the only one I think that is working at this time. So I will pass it over to you. Thank you, Councilmember Dahlquist.
Thank you, Councilmember Dahlquist, Mr. Mayor. Tom, I think, is in the audience. I can't see that part, but Tom, has there been specific concerns raised, and how many versus how many we sent out by Ward 1 on that part of the project regarding the special assessments?
Well, the comment, the summary of comments was provided, and for the North Moorhead project, actually, we didn't have any specific, nobody actually contacted city staff directly. I'm only aware of one phone call that had actually gone to council members that we were looped in on, and we gave some information on that, but that person never directly contacted us. But the 4 calls that Amy did take and that city staff had responded to were basically, you know, a couple about don't install the sidewalks, which are not part of the project, and then just asking about how the special assessment process works. One was a complaint about the interest rate we had in there, which we explained is it's just a placeholder because we actually don't know what the interest rate is now, and we expect it'll be a lower number, but we don't know until we issue the bond. And so that was all we had for feedback on the North Moorhead part of the project. For the 12th Avenue part, there were a couple of people that had raised some questions, but I think they didn't necessarily understand the process that got us to where we were. And you know, for example, one was saying don't do it now because it'll interfere with the underpass detour, and we understood that, and the project actually, the caller didn't know that we were delaying that part of the work until next year. So I think, you know, we answered those questions as best we could, and most people, you know, again, when we consider 1,050 notices sent out, I think we only had 2 or 3 people that really suggested not doing the project. So.
Am my understanding now, council staff, that the hand portion of the WebEx should be fixed? Can we test that now? I still see Madam. Yep. Okay. See. Yep. All right. I think we're looking good. I don't see Councilmember Duran. Do you want to test yours?
I did earlier, but I can try it again.
Yep. We're good. Okay. We're all good. Thanks, folks. And some of yours are still up, so I'm going to assume Councilmember Watson Curry.
Yes. Sorry, tested and then wanted to speak. You know, it dawns on me that with our new lineup for council, it might be worth at least explaining the, just to follow up to Councilmember Dahlquist's comment about the 2021 underpass. That that's an option. That's something that we are actively working to not have to utilize. But I know that is a concern that North Moorhead residents have in Ward 1. So, Tom, I don't know if you want to address that again, or City Manager Vogler, if you want to explain that we remained that tool, kept that tool open as a possibility, but the general discussion was to not utilize that option. Thank you.
So regarding the Southeast Main 20th, 21st project, we had a public hearing prior to awarding the bid. And at that time, I don't recall the assessment amount that was proposed. But basically, in order for the city to finance the project, we were keeping the options open. I think the proposed assessment might have been $800 per property. It was somewhere in that 500, maybe, it might have only been 500. I don't recall. I'd have to look that up. But it was generally, because it was an area-wide assessment, it was a relatively small number as a parcel basis would go. As far as whether or not it will happen, that'll be at the council's discretion. That said, the project budget probably needs that influx of cash, but that'll be a discussion we were going to, as we got further into the project, our intent was to bring that to the council for consideration at that time. And so sometime this summer, we were probably going to start having that discussion about it. But that's, yeah, there is that project. The north boundary for that assessment, it did go into north of Center Avenue. I think it went as far north as 4th Avenue North. I know it might have gone as far north as 8th. I know it went as far south as 12th Avenue South. So it had a fairly large area, and it went all the way to the river. So it got all of the downtown as well, on the basis of reducing the train traffic through that area. So for any more information on that, I'd have to go look that information up.
Thank you, Councilmember Watson Curry. Councilmember Dahlquist, your hand is up.
Yes, I understand, but it's still, the people in Ward 1 are hit over and over and over again, and it's just because of their position. And I know we want to make the downtown, you know, a place to go, but it's not equitable to keep hitting people in Ward 1 over and over. They were hit with the 15th Avenue. They were hit with the 28th Street North, which were all these bike paths that are for everyone. And the same with 12th Avenue. Anyone that has children at Horizon has to take 12th Avenue. It's just such a main artery, and I feel like Ward 1 actually pays twice, because they're paying their taxes, plus they're paying their assessment. And so I'm wanting the city to look for alternatives to assessments. It's just Ward 1 gets hit over and over, and these are working class people. And so that's something that I think needs to be changed, and it needs to be equitable. Everybody downtown, everyone can use the underpass, everyone 12th Avenue. And people are using the bike paths on 15th Avenue and on 20th Street North. So that's my suggestion, and I know people are anxious about being assessed at this time with the possibility of a second wave. And I would just like to let people off this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Dahlquist. So here's what we're going to do. I see a flurry of hands coming up. So I'm going to start with what I saw first and what I believe in chronological order. Unless, Madam City Volkers, you have something to add to what Mr. Trowbridge had stated, then I'm going to pass it over to the council. Is there something you want to add?
There is, Mayor. He said I'm wondering if Councilmember Dahlquist has a concern about the project itself. The road is so bad that Public Works can no longer fix it, and at some point the road will have to be closed if it's not repaired. So, and people live on that road, so it needs to be repaired. I wonder if, I don't think the objection I'm hearing is to the road repair, it's to the special assessments. And if that's the case, perhaps you'll consider voting for the road repair, and then we have to figure out the special assessment you know, when it comes up at a later time. If we don't do the road repair, like I said, there will be dire consequences at this point. We cannot fix that road anymore.
So unless, I'll give Councilmember Dahlquist a moment to marinate on that comment, and then what I'll do is I'm going to go down, keep your hands up, so I'm going to go with Councilmember White, then Councilmember Durand.
Thank you, Mayor. And our city manager, thanks, that answered part of my question, because I think it really is two separate issues. One is, do we support the project? And I think we've got some sound information from our engineering department showing the need, showing that if we don't do this, that it will cost us more later, because we wouldn't be able to just do a mill and overlay later on. We'd have to do a larger scale project. It is a heavily used area. And it would also, it would create problems with our coordination with MPS, right? Because we're doing some work at the same time, so we don't want to dig up a road twice. We just want to do it once, you know, so keep that coordination. So I think there's some important arguments on that side. In addition to that, you know, I mean, I think we're all grappling with this is you know, uncharted territory here, and we have an economy that is ground to a halt. And one of the tools that we have in our toolbox is to help create jobs. And this would create jobs this summer. This would create jobs in the very near future. And if those go away, that will further hurt the families in our community. You know, the folks that are depending on money within the construction industry and so on. But I do think that, you know, so for those reasons, I support the project, and I would like us later, since we don't have to decide exactly on the assessments, as you said, then we can make a decision later about exactly when we would implement those or how we would. So I think if we have that flexibility, you know, I feel strongly this is a good project.
Thank you, Councilmember White. We'll go Councilmember Durand and then Councilmember Carlson. I did see your hand up as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to echo pretty much what Councilmember White had to say. And to also note that some of the assessment protocol is beyond our control. We don't have, because of state statute and different things, sometimes our hands are tied as to what we can do. I'll support the project, but I'll also support looking into other ways to fund it. But I think we need to go forward with the project. That being said, we all have to understand that we don't have the tools to change, you know, state issues or state statutes. So we just need to keep that in mind. That it's not just us being able to say, well, we're not going to bill for it. We'll just figure out a way to pay it some other way. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Durand, and then Councilmember Carlson, Dahlquist, then Hendrickson. And if Councilmember Carlson, if you're speaking, we can't hear you on our end. If you're still speaking, we can't hear you on our end. It may be a technological barrier here. Is there a way that maybe, I mean, she may have to call in, unless there's another way to figure that out.
Mr. Mayor, this is Chris. She's going to reboot, I think, and sometimes the different platforms conflict with one another. So she's going to reboot, call back in. So maybe you could call her when she comes back on.
Okay, not a problem. Thank you for that heads up, City Manager Folkers. Then we'll go on to Councilmember Dahlquist and then Councilmember Hendrickson.
I also wanted to mention that the new church that's on 12th Avenue, it's in the old Yes building, is going to be hit pretty hard also. And that's one of my concerns. And I know we do want to have the project completed. I'm just saying this time here, so many people are going to be hit. And our median income is $34,000. So when you consider being behind on your mortgage, and the unpredictability, it would ease people's minds if we held it off a year. And then that would actually give us time to consider some alternatives to assessments, like the TARF, the tax exempt, to change it to it so it would be on a monthly utility bill. So everyone would be paying, but it would be a smaller amount. I just think this is a bad time for people, and I would just like to relieve their anxieties just for this time. And also on the 6th and 7th Avenue, not many houses face the avenue. They face the street, so they are not being assessed on the avenue. So it's not very equitable in that one assessment, because 6th and 7th Avenue extend farther from like 14th Street to 20th Street, and only 17th Street, 19th Street, I believe, are being assessed to cover the whole 6th and 7th Avenue. So in that one situation, it's a little unfair to pay for the extension of 6th and 7th Avenue when only 17th and 19th Street are paying. And now I'm done.
Well, Councilmember Dawkins, before I pass it over to Councilmember Hendrickson, Madam City Manager Volkers, and I think along with Councilmember White and Durand had asked, or generally speaking, they're trying to figure out, are you against, we know that you're not in favor of the assessments, but are you against the project as well? Or are you just, just universally against the whole concept, construction as well as the assessment?
Well, I believe these constructions need to be done. I agree with that. I just think this year, this specific time when there's so much uncertainty, and especially since people in both areas, 12th Avenue and on the north side, are not, extremely wealthy homes. And so getting hit with these assessments, especially with the threat of perhaps second wave in the fall, people are just going to be anxious, and adding that extra assessment, even though it wouldn't be till the fall of this year for the next year, still so much uncertainty. I agree 12th Avenue needs to be done. And so does the other construction in North Moorhead. I just feel like this time people are so stressed that I would like to see it be for the next year. And then in that time, we could find alternatives to assessments.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure that was clear. So, all right, so I hear, I believe, 1 second, Councilmember Hendrickson, Councilmember Carlson, are you back up and running?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. All right, so Councilmember Hendrickson, you can hold tight. Let me give Councilmember Carlson, and then I'll pass it over to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so I missed a little bit of that because I had to dig around for some headphones in order to put this on. I think my concern, going along with what Councilmember Wade and Councilmember Durand said, that these are projects that, number one, are going to create jobs. My thought is that as a council, we can defer assessments and putting that into place for a period of time. Additionally, there is the deferment process for senior citizens and for individuals who are retired. And so if those are individuals that would fall in that category, they should be contacting our finance department. And particularly for the 12th Avenue project, this is a project that's been ID'd since 2015. And when we have access to close to $2 million in federal funding, that is ultimately going to help out our taxpayers. And if we don't utilize that funding now, it's not going to be accessible to us for
likely a good 5 to 6, 7 years. And in the meantime, our roads are just going to continue to deteriorate. The issue about the 2021 area and east of 20th, that wouldn't occur until a year from now. So then there are some issues raised about traffic too, and I think that that would be alleviated because that portion of the project wouldn't be worked on until after 2021 was done. And going back to initially what Councilmember Dahlquist brought up about, you know, that this particular area has been assessed over and over again, I think that there are several parts of the city that continue to be heavily assessed. One is in Ward 2 in the 20th Street area. And I think it's important to bring out and explain to the public that we are combining these two projects of 6th and 7th and 18th and 20th Street and 12th Avenue. We're combining all of them so that we can issue a geo bond, and that creates a much larger assessment area. So it's not that these projects are just done piecemeal, because they would actually increase the assessments. This is something that we're trying to expand as many individuals in our city to help cover these road projects that have been kind of on our to-do list for some of them up to 5 years. And so those are just the comments that I wanted to bring forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Carlson. I'll pass over to Councilmember Hendrickson and then Councilmember White.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate Councilmember Dahlquist's compassion for her constituents on the north side, but I agree with, and not saying that she doesn't agree, but I agree with what's been said. I support the project, and I am open to any ways to fund it. Councilmember Carlson brought up some good points on how we can defer it for some of our vulnerable citizens, our senior citizens. But the one thing I want to bring up too, and like I said, I agree with everything that was said, is that the project's not going to get cheaper either. You could just see prices growing and growing, especially you know, in economic times like this. I could see this becoming more and more expensive if we do delay it. So, but like I said again, I appreciate all the comments, and I do appreciate your compassion, Councilmember Dahlquist. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. And then Councilmember White. Or Councilmember White, did you have a comment you wanted to make? I saw your hand go down.
Just 2 points. One is that interest rates are so low right now. That also makes it a favorable time for us to borrow and take on a project. And just to clarify again, because I agree that, you know, Councilmember Dahlquist, I agree with all of your points that we really want to be careful about how we pass the burden to our residents right now. But I think we can do both of these, and so that's my feeling. Our city manager could let me know if I'm incorrect about this, but I think we don't need to make any decisions right now about when exactly we would pass that on as an assessment. And so we could potentially delay that longer. So we will have to make some decision later in the fall, but if we find at that time that the economy has not improved and it would not be a good time to put that burden onto our residents, that we could at that time make a decision to postpone that. And so it sounds like, my understanding is that we could do the project and still achieve the things that you've been talking about.
Thank you, Councilmember White. Councilmember Dahlquist, I still see your hand up. Did you want to make any comments as it relates to your colleagues?
I was just going to say that the 6th and 7th Avenue construction was just added this year. It was not in the main plan. But thank you everyone for supporting just in theory how we feel about assessments. Thank you.
Thank you all for your discussion. Is there any other follow-up that staff or City Manager Volkers wishes to make on this before we move further? Okay, so we already have a motion that's been made and seconded to take us out of public hearing. So then, unless there's any further discussion, I'll pass it over to Madam City Clerk.
Dahlquist,
Yes.
Carlson,
Yes.
Watson Curry,
Yes.
Durand,
Yes.
White, Lindos,
Yes.
Hendrickson,
Yes.
Seljevold.
Yes.
Motion passes. We're out of public hearing. And that leads us to 8A, the resolution to order the improvements and declare intent to assess.
Move approval by Durand.
Second, Carlson.
Mr. City Attorney, can we do A and B together?
Yeah, you could do them combined.
Okay. Is there a way, Councilmember Durand, would you include A and B?
Yes, I can motion to include A and B.
Thank you.
There's a C.
And
There's a
Oh,
C also.
and C. And C. And does that second still stand as it regards to A, B, and C?
I'm not sure who you are giving the second to, if it's myself, Councilmember Carlson, or Councilmember White, but if it's me, then yes.
I'm deferring to Madam City Clerk on that one.
Shelley Carlson will have that one.
Okay. All right, any further discussion? Madam City Clerk, please commence with the roll call vote.
Watson Curry,
Yes.
Carlson,
Yes.
Dahlquist,
No.
Durand,
Yes.
White, Seljevold,
Yes.
Lindos,
Yes.
Hendrickson.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you all for your discussion on this item. We move to item number 9, which is a public hearing for 4th and 5th Avenue South and 12th and 13th Street South Street improvements. Engineer number 20-A2-06. Is there a motion to take us into public hearing on this matter?
Watson Curry, so moved.
Seconded.
You got that, Madam?
I think so.
All right. Roll call vote, please.
Carlson,
Yes.
Watson Curry,
Yes.
Dahlquist,
Yes.
Durand,
Yes.
White, Hendrickson,
Yes.
Seljevold,
Yes.
Lindos.
Yes.
Motion carries. We are now in public hearing on this item. Mr. Trowbridge.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this project is for a group of streets. There's 2 streets and 2 avenues kind of on the north side of the Moorhead State, or Minnesota State University Moorhead area. And on the second slide shows the project area. Kind of makes a tic-tac-toe board there. And most of these streets we're looking at doing as a mill and overlay. Some has to be a rehab. This particular part of town is pretty old. The homes were mostly constructed in the 20s and 30s. All of the homes, I think, were done being constructed by 1950. Our engineering records that we've kept some time back, they threw out a bunch of the really old plans, figuring we didn't need them anymore. And I actually can't find any record. We don't really have any records prior to 1955. So these streets were all originally constructed prior to 1955. The only engineering project I can find of any substance was on 4th Avenue South from 11th to 14th Street back in 2000. And at that time, that road is a concrete road that has bituminous on top, and it was widened and then overlaid at that time. And so it's been about 20 years. A refresher overlay is probably a good idea for that one too. But our engineering records, we have an old map that just says whether a road was gravel and oil, which basically means they kept throwing oil and gravel on top of it, and that's what makes up the pavement that's there. And then there's some that just says bituminous pavement, so it was probably a gravel surface that they threw 2 or 3 inches of asphalt on top of it. Over the years, between seal coating and maybe Public Works has done some overlays, we don't always have good information on that. But I have no record of us doing a project specific where we hired a contractor to do anything. So it's been a long time since any substantial work has been done on these areas. And the PCIs don't look that bad for some of them, but the roads are definitely, with that age, there's not much oil in the pavement, and so it's really starting to break up now. And the surface is just, it's getting a bit tougher. So fortunately in this area, it does have sidewalks on both sides of all of the streets, so we didn't have to worry about that. Most of the sanitary sewer out there is vitrified clay pipe. Our current standard is to do PVC pipe. There's a short segment of PVC pipe on 13th Street that was installed back in 1992 to fix a problem that shows up next on this slide, long services on 12th Street. So back in the day, to save money, a lot of times people had shared services. It's not a good idea to have that. And sometimes, rather than run a new sewer main down the street, they just ran a long service down the boulevard. So there's some interior lots that have very long services that we think go underneath other buildings, would be very difficult to maintain. So end result is we've proposed to run a new sewer down half that block, and it happens to be a block that MPS was doing the water main on anyway. And so it was a road we were going to do a rehab, so it's the most cost-effective time for us to do that. The storm sewer that's out there was installed over a couple of projects between 1955 and 1976, which fixed what was at that time a problem that they didn't have storm sewer. They used the sanitary sewer, so that was fixing that back then. That's why it has storm sewer out there. So as I said, this is an area that was, we broke all the rules back when we did this one. And then the water main, most of the water mains out there have been replaced by Moorhead Public Service, but there is still a segment on 12th Street that's cast iron that needs to be replaced. So this map here shows what we're proposing to do. You can see there's one block that we're proposing as a rehabilitation. So that would be trying to keep as much of the curb and gutter as we can, but removing all of the pavement section and completely replacing the pavement. The rest of the roads out there, we're proposing to do a mill and overlay, because from the soil borings we did, there is actually enough thickness of asphalt that's there that we can put a mill and overlay on it. Sidewalk improvements will just be the typical, since these are older sidewalks, none of the ped ramps meet the current ADA standards, so we'll be replacing those. And then as I described, we've got a couple of pieces of utilities to do. Moorhead Public Service will do the water main themselves, and then under our contract, we'll do the sanitary sewer work. So we had a preliminary design informational meeting with the residents back in February. At that time, it was just general concerns about how do I get to my driveway during construction, what happens to the mail, garbage pickup, other services like that. And then, of course, special assessments. There was a bit of discussion about that. And then we mailed the public hearing notice on April 16th. And now we're having the hearing tonight. The mailed notice went to 87 properties. There's a total of 93 that abut the project, but 6 of them are corner lots that front on a different road, so they'll get their assessment at some future date when we do those streets. And that's one of the ways that we try to have the policy be equitable, is corner lots don't have to pay for 2 streets. Usually they're having access to one. And so rather than hit them for everything, they get 150-foot credit up to that on their long side. So as long as they're shorter than 150 feet, they don't get an assessment when it's their side lot. Okay. Large properties, if they take the entire block, they'll still get some assessment for that. So out of the 87 notices that were sent out, we received 2 questions, and nobody stated any opposition. It was just, again, typical questions regarding, how does the assessment work, and also not unusual is if they've got some poor drainage, and the streets, when they're this old, sometimes there's curb and gutter that doesn't drain well, and we do try to fix that with these projects. So that's really all the comments that we've received on this project. So all of the comments that we have received have been compiled as part of the record and have been provided to the City Council for their consideration. So for this project, the proposed special assessments, per the city policy, we have a $30 per adjusted front foot for the mill and overlay, and a $61 assessment for the adjusted front foot on the rehabilitation. This one does not have an area-wide assessment to it. This area actually would have been assessed for the Sims Main Avenue project in 2017, about. So that would have been their east-west area-wide collector. And then we haven't done their north-south. 11th Street would be their north-south collector, and they would get that assessment whenever we do that project, which is a few years out in the CIP. So, and again, so that adjusted front footage, mostly in this case, these are all rectangular lots, so it's your actual front footage, unless it's the corner lot credit factoring into it. So, so that's really the only adjustments that had to be made on these. This map shows the boundary of the assessment area, and so this identifies the properties that are abutting the improvements and potentially have assessments. And so yeah, you can see there, we highlight the one block that has the $61 assessment. That would be 12th Street from 3rd to 4th Avenue. Otherwise, the rest of the streets out there are the mill and overlay assessment. For this project, the total project cost is about $792,000, I think. And our total assessment is about $153,000. And actually, I wasn't sure if that was the correct number, but so then the assessments, and I made a mistake on this table because I didn't talk to our assessment coordinator. It's part of the problem of trying to do a lot of teleworking. 93 properties abut the improvements, 6 of them don't get an assessment. So there's actually only 87 that are getting assessed. And when I calculated that average assessment, I was basing it on 93, so that was incorrect. The median assessment doesn't change, and the high and the low doesn't change. But the average assessment goes up slightly. It would be $1,758. So it's not a huge difference, but it is about 10% higher. And yeah, I thought that previous slide where I had a total project cost of $793 was incorrect. After we received the bids, I think that previous slide had been prepared before receiving the bids. This is actually with the bids having been received, and so the total project cost is actually estimated to be $764,500, which means that assessments that we're doing is 20% of the project cost. That is the minimum that it takes for us to bond for the project, actually. And so the remaining share is the city funds, the 80% of that. So for this project, this just briefly summarizes the project schedule. If we award the bids tonight, the project would start construction fairly soon. probably towards the end of May, and it should be wrapped up before September 1st. And then the normal practice would be to hold the assessment hearing in the fall of 2020. You know, the city could, as we discussed at the last council meeting, that's a decision you can make at the time of the assessment hearing or prior to its schedule, you know, when we call for the assessment hearing, or actually it's when the city's issuing the bonds, we can consider whether or not we want to hold the hearing this fall or next fall. Either one is an option, so for tonight, again, we're holding the public hearing, and after closing the hearing, we would ask that the council consider a resolution to order the improvements and to consider a resolution to award the bids. And since this project is another typical street project where we have not received petitions for it, this is driven by the council and the city's capital improvement program, so therefore, to order the improvements requires a vote of 7 in favor of it, and then to award the bids per the city charter, the contract requires 6 votes. So if you have any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Trowbridge. We do have a couple of questions. I'll go with who I saw first. We'll do Councilmember Lindos and then Councilmember White.
Thank you, Mr. Trowbridge. I guess one of the questions I had was just, I was placing this, and are you using, it looks like there's a map, the corner lot, and I might just be off on what I'm thinking, but the block between 11th and 12th Street and 6th and 5th Avenue, I thought that was a parking lot now. Is the 6th Avenue, this is the part run just north of Minnesota State University, Moorhead.
Yes, 6th Avenue South is the road that runs along the north side of like the Comstock Union, or yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so that 5th, there's not houses in that, and I might be just, Councilmember White can maybe give me.
There's so from 11th to 12th Street, for example, I know between 5th and 6th Avenue, that's an MSUM parking lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was just looking at your map, and it had lots in there right now.
It's still, they never replatted. So they purchased a lot of homes and converted it to parking lot, but it's still separate parcels. Yep.
Okay. So that just explains what I'm looking at. The other question, I guess, just has to do with 11th Street. That's a road that has lots of challenges. And I'm not wondering kind of what this project, what impact that's going to have on that road.
Oh, I wouldn't expect this project to have an impact on that road. The part of the reason we haven't done anything to 11th Street yet is because it's a concrete road, even though it looks tough and it's bumpy, it isn't really getting much worse because it's concrete. It handles that traffic, and it's not deteriorating as fast as other roads would in that case. So we've been able to kind of kick that can down the road, but it is in the CIP. The traffic the construction traffic necessary to do this mill and overlay project would not cause any significant issues for that.
Thank you. Councilmember White?
Thanks, Mayor. I have a question about that section on 4th Avenue between 11th and 14th Street. So that's the area that has the concrete pavement. And so you're planning to do mill and overlay in that area. And I just wondered, do you have any concerns about the durability of that, or do you expect it to hold up as well as when it's on the bituminous pavement?
Okay, I think I heard it. I think she was talking about the 4th Avenue South that is concrete with bituminous over the top of it. And she was asking if that would hold up. That should be fine. It's a fairly common road construction method to have a bituminous surface on top of concrete. And we need this, we couldn't mill it off and replace it with concrete because that would be too thin and brittle and would break apart. So it needs the bituminous is what it has to be, because that's what it takes to match the curb. And for the type of traffic that Fourth Avenue carries, the bituminous mix it'll do fine on the concrete.
I thought I recalled I thought Steve Moore had mentioned before that it didn't always adhere as well to the concrete, obviously to tunings. I don't know if that was just a
Councilmember White, I'm sorry to interrupt. We can't hear you. I don't know if there's any way to kind of move your mic closer, because you're kind of cutting in and out. Sorry.
So I just said, I recalled Steve Moore talking about one of the surfaces that it didn't adhere as well to. And I couldn't remember if it was that old concrete, that it just wouldn't adhere as well to the concrete, and so it tended to flake off.
If we're not concerned with this. I mean, I think with the construction practice, I mean, with the contractor that does this type of project all the time, I think as long as they have the proper tack coat down, it should adhere. So I'm not aware of a problem with that.
Thank you, Councilmember White. Are there any other questions on this item? And I apologize, bear with us. I think it's got to be 80 degrees in here. I think we're now passing out water bottles because it is burning up. Just so y'all are aware, be thankful at least tonight you're in the comfort of your own homes, because it's hot. So, any other questions regarding this item?
I do have one speaker on the phone.
Okay, and let the record reflect, we do have one speaker who is on the phone now, so if there are any questions, we'll probably let the speaker speak on this item. And since this is our first speaker, we'll let Madam City Clerk, since you're the expert here, well, at least the expert tonight anyway, we're going to let you, do we just put the speaker through and it
Yes,
gets 3
we'll-
minutes?
Yep, we will have Joan on the line.
Okay, so we have Joan, and can Joan hear us now?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can. Thank you very much for calling in tonight, Joan. What we'll do, to the extent that you're comfortable, normally what we do during the public meetings is the process is you just state your first and last name and your address, and then once you're done with that, then Madam City Clerk will start the 3-minute clock, and then what I'll do is I'll probably give you a heads up, probably 30 seconds if you're getting close to the end. So forgive me, I don't want to come across as rude, but just to give you a heads up, and then we'll go from there, okay?
That's right. I'm good with that. Are we ready?
Yep, absolutely. Go right ahead.
Okay. All right. First of all, my name is Joan, Joan. Middle initial is L. Last name is Feldseth. That's F like in father. Jeldsheth at 1116. That's 1116 5th Avenue South here in Moorhead. Go Spuds.
Great, thank you. Go right ahead and start.
Okay. All right. Now, I need to let everyone know that I'm a lifelong Moorhead. I was born over at St. Ansgar's, and so was my dad. He was born in 1939, and he taught me a lot about this town. And so what I need to let you know is that our family approves everything that is good about Moorhead. And if it means spending the dollars to finally get roads built and fixed, let's do it. Because for the last 30, 40 years, everyone has been putting things behind, and they didn't have money for this, and it was too expensive back then. Well, now it really is expensive, and now we really need to do it. And so I am really tired, and so is the rest of my family, that when Minneapolis shows Moorhead on the map, we are always second place to Fargo. So the best way we can hold our own to the other great Minnesota cities is to fix our roads and have our infrastructure look better than Fargo. All right? With that being said, the things that we are requesting is that when it comes to, let's talk about turning off water and the plumbing and all the sewer systems and the maps that the city attorney or whoever was referring to. First of all, when they put the sewer system in, they ran it along the property line. And how we know that is go back to Laney's, because they threw some blue dye down the toilet and boom, it went out to 12th Street. And that's how we know it went right along the property line and shot right through the other property lines of the two houses on 12th Street. So what we're asking for is when you guys come out and shut off the water, you please let the people who live on the avenues know that you're turning off the water. Because there's no sewer lines on the avenues. It's all on the streets. Okay? So that's one. The second thing, we have been trying for years, and we've been trying to go through the city engineering department. Maybe that's the wrong department, but they have totally ignored us. And so out there on the corner of 5th and 12th, there is a hydrant. And on that hydrant, then on the curb, runs a yellow line. Well, during the winter, the snow plows come out and pile the snow 8 feet, sometimes 10 feet high. And then the kids from Moorhead State come along and park there and block the hydrant.
Give about 15 seconds,
We got a
ma'am.
lot of elderly and new families that have come into this older part of the neighborhood. And so what we are requesting is at the end of that yellow line, when you break everything up and you build it back up, that you attach a sign that says, from here to the corner, no parking. That way, we don't have to come out and endanger ourselves trying to remove 8 to 10 feet of snow that your city plows have left behind. That way the kids know and everyone knows you're not supposed to park in front of a hydrant. Okay? 3.
Ma'am,
when it comes to that,
Joan, sorry,
Huh?
sorry. I really hate to cut you off, but I let you go a little more than the 3 minutes because.
I got one more thing. That's
well,
it.
Well, let me.
And the question is with the hydrant, when is it going to be flushed and painted? That's it.
All
That's
right.
all I got to add.
Well, thank you very much, and I greatly appreciate the history lesson. I was completely unaware of that. So,
Well, you got to talk to people who have lived here all their life and haven't moved away. And then also talk to the people who service the sewer lines, and that would be Gibbs & Son, that would be Laney's, that would be some of these people that absolutely know exactly how the sewer systems run in these old parts of town.
Great. Well, thank you again. And so I think, Mr. Trowbridge, did you want to?
Probably the best thing to do, if I can give her my phone number and she can try calling me. I will be at my desk the next couple of days. It may be the easiest chance to talk and make sure, and then I can get, some of her questions I think are Moorhead Public Service questions, and I can get her to the right place there, and like for the sign request, we can look at that. I'll see what, so I think the best thing for her to do would be to call me at her convenience. And so my number, my office number is 299-5395.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Nice. Thank you, John. And then before I'll
And
pass.
go Spuds.
Thank you, all day, every day.
Oh, hey, if we don't come together as a town and become Team Moorhead on these assessment things and help people out, we are going to die in the dust to Fargo. And I am so sick and tired of hearing about Fargo on some city, on the Twin Cities weather map. It's like, hey, we need to start writing letters and telling them Moorhead exists and it's Go Spuds. And by the way, in the next 5 years, we're bringing home that hockey championship, by the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. We really appreciate you calling in this evening. Councilmember White, I see your hand is up.
It's been left over from
sorry. I think we can,
Oh, she took it down, I think.
oh, okay, sorry. You don't have a question or comment? Okay, sorry about that. Are there any other questions or comments? Madam City Clerk, has there anyone else that has called in?
Not at this time.
Any emails received?
Nope.
Okay. Any other communications written otherwise?
No.
Other than those already previously stated? All right. And then I don't see any hands up from council. So then I will entertain a motion to exit the public hearing.
Councilmember Lindos so moves.
Second, Carlson.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, Madam City Clerk, please.
Lindos,
Yes.
Hendrickson,
Yes.
Seljevold,
Yes.
Durand,
Yes.
White, Carlson,
Yes.
Watson Curry,
Yes.
Dahlquist.
Yes.
Motion carries. We are now out of public hearing. Then we'll move to items 9A and B. Is there a motion to approve both of those items combined?
Councilmember
So moved,
Lindos.
Henderson.
Second, Lindos.
Madam City Clerk, did you get that? All right. I'm not sure how you did, but I admire that. Any further discussion? All right, roll call vote, please.
Watson Curry,
Yes.
Carlson,
Yes.
Dahlquist,
Yes.
Durand,
Yes.
White,
Yes.
Seljevold,
Yes.
Hendrickson,
Yes.
Lindos.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you, folks. We'll move on to item number 10, local business update in response to coronavirus COVID-19. Derek Lapointe, DMI, and Sherry Larson, Moorhead Business Association. And I do believe they are on the phone. Mr. Lapointe, Ms. Larson?
This is Sherry Larson. Yes, I'm here.
Good. How you doing?
Derek,
Hey.
can't hear Derek.
Yep, Derek is present, we just can't hear him. I did hear Ms. Larson, I didn't hear Derek yet.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm here.
Nope, we got you. We're just waiting on Mr. Lapointe,
Derek?
and now he's gone. But he'll call back in, I'm sure. Councilmember Hendrickson, do you wish to start humming or singing the Jeopardy theme?
Voice is kind of sore, Mayor, thanks, though. Three shades of red, Mayor, thank you.
What's
Fortunately,
that?
nobody gets to see it.
I
You
see
hear me,
you.
Mr. Mayor?
Awesome, there you go. Welcome back.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
I don't know if Sherry has started yet or not, but I'll maybe just jump in. So obviously, it's been a busy couple of months. We've all been dealing with the pandemic in a lot of variety of situations. Certainly, the business community has been hit hard. We're working with all different types of industries, whether they're restaurants or retailers or manufacturers, industrial companies, et cetera. And just trying to get the right information, the source of information out. And one thing I wanted to stress on before I started is the SBA, the National SBA, typically recognizes Small Business Appreciation Week starting on Monday next week. That has been postponed through the national efforts until sometime in September. But I think it's really important, and something that Sherry and I really wanted to stress on, is that now is more of a time than any to support our local businesses in a big way, whether that's going and supporting those that are currently open, whether it's curbside or delivery services, or buying gift cards for those that aren't open. These are all little things that we can do to really make a big difference in a time of need. Certainly there are federal and state programs that are available to our businesses, and that we've been trying to get those to apply to, get the sources of information out to them as well. Sherry and I probably talked about, I would say maybe 5 times a day. So we're pretty consistent on our communication. We've seen a lot of efforts come out within our region, but I think for us, we've really tried to be a leader for the information coming out of the state of Minnesota. We've had numerous calls with other state partners, including the State of Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, our obviously regional partners in the regional Greater Fargo-Moorhead EDC, and the regional Chamber of Commerce. I've also been on for the last about 8 weeks now Minnesota conference call that includes the Department of Revenue, Department of Commerce, and other variety of departments on the state. That used to be a daily call, and I've been sharing notes from that conversation
Still there, Derek?
Indeed.
I believe Derek is still talking. We might have lost some communication here.
Partners that kind of get that information out to folks.
My apologies, Derek. I think we might have lost you for about maybe 20 to 20-ish seconds there. And it might be a weird way to end. Could you go back and probably give us a general overview of the last 20 seconds of your talk there? It might be kind of hard to do, but sorry. And I don't see Derek. I think we lost him. So I think we lost Derek. Sherry, are you there?
I am still here.
Okay. Okay. He's going to get, I guess Derek's going to get bridged in.
Okay.
Did everyone else catch Derek, or were they able to hear him? I'll assume that's a no, because we couldn't hear him here, so. We'll get a couple moments here.
Mr. Mayor, it's Derek again. I apologize for getting frozen there.
No worries. No worries at all.
I have no idea where I got disconnected, but you know, I'll leave it as this. We're here to serve our businesses. We're taking a lead for those in Minnesota. We're constantly communicating with our state partners, our regional partners, We are here to get that information out, and I feel like we've been a leader to those in our region as well. And we are here to serve our businesses, whether it's personal contact for those. We're here to answer your questions. We're here to help in these difficult times, and we'll be there to support you when it's time to reopen.
No, thank you very much, Derek. And Sherry, do you have anything to add to that as well?
Well, yes, so thank you. What I would like to add is I've been reaching out to the small businesses in Moorhead, and next week on our MBA Facebook page, we're going to be doing some live videos with them coming directly from the businesses about the Small Business Week, and looking forward to seeing that.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you both for all of your work. I know that, and I will say, just based on the amount of work that you both have done, you absolutely both in your entities are leaders in telling the Minnesota narrative regarding helping our businesses in this region. So thank you both for all of your work and for the presentation this evening. Does that have anything open for council members to wish to speak on at all, or questions? I see Councilmember White, your hand is up.
Thank you, Mayor. I also wanted to say thanks to Derek and Sherry. I've been watching all of the communications they have and all the work that they're doing with our local business partners. But also, I just want to give another plug for MBA too, because they have also continued with their weekly meetings and doing things to really reach out and support their members. And it just proves again what a great partner.
Thank you, Councilmember White. Does that raise any other questions or comments for anyone? All right. Thank you again, Derek and Sherry, for all of your work. And again, if you need anything from us, please let us know. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You all.
All right, folks. I think that drops us to item number 21 on tonight's agenda, which is the Moorhead Clay County Joint Powers of Authority, MCC JPA, seeking a resolution of necessity from the City of Moorhead for biotic and geomorphic rights of entry in Wilkin County. And I believe on this particular item, Joel Paulson, Executive Director for the FM Diversion Project, and I believe we have also some folks that are with Joel, but I'll let him introduce those folks. Mr. Paulson.
Well, thank you, Your Honor. I'll just do a quick sound check to make sure you can hear me okay.
You're good in council chambers.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you, Your Honor, for having us here tonight. Thank you to the esteemed council members of the Council of the Great City of Moorhead. We'd like to have the opportunity to speak tonight about some rights of entry in Wilkin County and how the City of Moorhead could assist us in our mission of meeting our environmental requirements under federal law. I'll just start out and let everyone know I have Mr. Eric Dodds on the phone as well. He is the Diversion Authority's Land Management Program Manager. I also have Ms. Terry Williams from the Corps of Engineers, Mr. Kevin Den from the Corps of Engineers, and Mr. Chris McShane from Onstead Twitchell, Legal Counsel for the Lands Program. So I'd like to start out just and give a little background and then move into some of the procedural steps that we've gone through up to this point, which brings us to the City Council tonight. And then obviously open it up for any questions that the council may have, since this does appear on face value to be somewhat of an unconventional request to the City of Moorhead. So I'll start out, as the City Council knows, in your honor, we've been working on a very large regional flood protection project. The City of Moorhead is a member entity of the Diversion Authority who is tasked for implementing the flood control project. We run all of our land programs through different member entities, the Cass County Joint Water Resource District on the North Dakota side, and the Moorhead Clay County Joint Powers Authority on the Minnesota side. And so the Moorhead Clay County Joint Powers Authority is actually the entity seeking this resolution tonight. I'm speaking on behalf, just to provide clarification, so that we understand exactly the roles and responsibilities as they relate back to the diversion authority itself. And so, Your Honor, as you know, the project is a federal project, and because it's a federal project, we need to meet the requirements of the Clean Water Act and a number of other environmental protection acts that have been established by Congress. We're currently working with the Corps of Engineers to meet our environmental responsibilities. And with that specifically is an adaptive management plan. And that plan has been created by the Corps of Engineers. And it has a number of monitoring requirements that need to be collected so we can establish baseline compliance for environmental monitoring in the future. This plan consists of approximately 450 parcels of land where monitoring for biological species and river erosion will occur. These parcels of land were identified by a number of member regulatory agencies, Fish and Wildlife, state of Minnesota, state of North Dakota, environmental folks, and the different sites are intended to provide a comprehensive environmental monitoring program. The initial data collection actually occurred in 2010. And so the parcels we're discussing tonight already have historic data tied to them. And that is the reason that we need to continue to fulfill our obligations on these parcels as they relate back to the environmental requirements that we've laid out here. So these four parcels tonight that we're discussing specifically are in Wilkin County. I will have Mr. Shockley give some background to the council and the mayor as far as why we're asking the city of Moorhead to take action on these four parcels. This action is a right of entry, so it allows us to send our scientists in and to do the testing that needs to be done to comply with the federal requirements. And again, this is to create that baseline. So just to give a little historic context to our engagement with these properties, we did initially contact the property owners in Wilkin County in November of 2019. That initial contact resulted in 2 voluntary right of entries out of the 10 total in Wilkin County. As we moved further through the process, we requested the Buffalo Red watershed to reach out to the property owners in Wilkin County because they are contained within the Buffalo Red watershed district's boundaries. The Buffalo Red agreed to assist. They saw the value in protecting landowners' rights as related to any future potential of impact due to the diversion project. And the Buffalo Red was successful in obtaining 5 additional rights of entry out of the 10. And so, I'm sorry, 3 additional out of the 10. So that brings us to a total of 5 voluntary rights of entry for parcels in Wilkin County. The Buffalo Red was not able to obtain the last 5. And so that brings us here tonight in our request to the city of Moorhead to assist us in acquiring the right of entry to enter the parcels and do our environmental monitoring. And just to note for the council, this is a check and balance. So this is to ensure that the diversion authority is meeting our responsibilities in accordance with federal requirements, local and state requirements, and making sure that we're monitoring any unintended impacts that the diversion project may have in the future. So I'll turn it over now to Mr. Shockley, who can explain the legal rationale for the request tonight for the city of Moorhead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The city of Moorhead is being requested to authorize rights of entry for some properties. And so just to be 100% clear, a right of entry is not the use of eminent domain. That's why the action tonight does not require 6 votes under the city charter. Just once again, it is not an eminent domain action. A right of entry is specifically that. It's authorization to enter property for a limited period of time to conduct some type of test or analysis. In this case, as Mr. Paulson had indicated, these are environmental testing. I think the best analogy that I could think about relating to a large-scale project versus some of our smaller projects is we oftentimes, when the city of Moorhead is doing construction projects that require pounding, we'll go in and do reports of basements and other walls around the site prior to construction, and then again after construction, to monitor to see if there is damage to those parcels. In very much the same way, but on a much larger scale, this project is requiring environmental monitoring before and after the project. That information would be available to the public, and so for instance, if there was an allegation that some type of wildlife was injured or there's sediment or additional flooding, there's a baseline to measure that against so that we know precisely what the baseline data is without the project, and then another measurement after the project. And so just, I can answer the additional legal questions that you might have about it, but baseline, it's just a request to enter property. Back in 2010, the city of Moorhead actually undertook all of the rights of entry, but pursuant to the MCC JPA, Clay County took on most of those that are within Clay County. There's just a few scattered parcels that are outside of Clay County that require the authority of the city of Moorhead rather than Clay County. And once again, it's not eminent domain, so.
Thank you, Mr. Shockley. Mr. Paulson, am I handing it back to you to continue, or is that where we're at?
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I think John did a good job of summarizing the legal aspect. The reason we're asking the city of Moorhead is Moorhead has the authority under state statute. If they are a member of a project that impacts a political jurisdiction outside of its boundaries, Moorhead has the authority to acquire those actions that would allow us to access the right of entries in this case. And as I understand, and Mr. Shockley can confirm, the county does not have that capability under Minnesota state statute. And so the city of Moorhead is the only member entity with the authority to issue a resolution of necessity for rights of entry in order to access these parcels with the explicit purpose of environmental monitoring. And so, Mr. Shockley can correct any of my previous statements. Other than that, I think we'll make ourselves available for any questions that the council may have.
Thank you, Mr. Paulson. I do see that there is Councilmember Duran has a question. Her hand is up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I have several concerns and questions. I'll be voting no on this tonight. Not only is it awkward that the city of Moorhead would do something like this in a completely different county, it's wrong in my opinion. I also am concerned that if this has been an issue, or if this has been studied since 2010, why aren't there other sites that can be utilized? If there are, dozens of sites that are are currently being used, and there are 5 that are causing an issue, why can't we find 5 other sites that would not infringe on property rights? Because that's what it boils down to, is property owners have the right to say no. And there's no reason why the city of Moorhead should step up and say, doesn't matter what you say. We're the city of Moorhead and we're gonna do the dirty work and we're gonna enter your property, whatever, regardless of what you say. That just goes against all land rights. People pay taxes to own their property. This is just, it baffles me. So instead of trying to take away or infringe on property rights, why aren't we simply trying to find 5 different locations that would work out? And don't tell me that we can't find 5 sites, alternative sites. Somebody on council told me 8 years ago that if somebody gives you the answer no, they're not working hard enough. They're not trying hard enough. So I'm voting no tonight. I hope others will consider this is wrong. We should not be taking away property owners' rights, the right to say no. And we need to hold the Corps responsible. If they were hired to do a job, the Diversion Authority hired them to do a job, the Diversion Authority should be able to say find 5 different sites. I'm sorry, that's where I stand, and I hope my fellow councilmen and women will also think about this and consider its severity and its morality. That's all I have to say. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I look forward to hearing what my fellow council members have to say.
And Mr. Paul, thank you, Councilmember Duran. Mr. Paulson, before I pass it to you, I just want to acknowledge, just so the council members know that I see their hands up. So after you've had a chance to respond, Mr. Paulson or someone from your team, I will have Councilmember White, Councilmember Seljevold, and Councilmember Dahlquist in that order also ask questions, just so they know that I see them. Okay, so Mr. Paulson, I'll pass it back over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councilmember Duran. Certainly appreciate your comments and your insight. I'll let Terry Williams or Kevin Den with the Corps respond to the 5 additional sites and finding different locations. But just to kind of set the stage for some of the morality and severity issues that you addressed, you know, we don't want to do these actions. We want to work with landowners in any way that we can. According to federal environmental requirements, we need to meet all of the specific provisions with that. I would consider this action really in landowners' best interest. It allows us to set that baseline, and we can monitor that and compensate and mitigate for any future damages that were unintended with the project. And as the council knows, this is a project for public good. Unfortunately, you know, actions like this need to occur in certain circumstances where we're looking at the greater good of providing flood protection for the metro area. But with that, I'll turn it over to Terry Williams or Kevin Den.
Mayor Judd and council members, this is Terry Williams, Corps of Engineers. I'm the program manager for the Fargo-Moorhead Diversion Project. The selection of the parcels or the sites to do the surveys really dates back to the feasibility study. We worked with our Natural Resource Agency partners and formed what's called a geomorphology management team. And together we identified the best spots to go out and do surveys pre-project, pre-construction, and then post-project. And it's very important that the surveys are conducted at the same spots, both for pre-project and post-project, so that the proper comparisons can be made. You can, post-project, go back to see what that pre-project data looks like, what were the conditions then, and to see what, if any changes have occurred because of the diversion project and the operation. And so it is, I understand that selecting different parcels, different landowners might be desired, but it's really important to everybody to establish a baseline and then be able to go back and compare the data. And we selected those parcels initially not based on who owns them. It was strictly where are they located on the river, where are they located outside of the proposed staging area of the project, within the proposed staging area, and then on trips and rivers within the metro and downstream. So it is very important that we're able to go back to these sites again, which we've already done a round of surveys on before, and then again post-project. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. I think what I'll do, unless there's someone else that's going to add on to that, I'll pass it over to Councilmember Deb White.
Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. I had a couple of questions, and I wanted to thank you for taking the time to allow for property owners to give input, and I know that we did receive one letter from Mr. Ness, who's one of the property owners, and so I think he made a couple of points that I would want you to address. Some of it we've already talked about, but he also talked about the concern for the breadth of the language, and so if you could give us some information about what access would be allowable, or would the property owners be notified when someone was coming to gather some data, or is it sort of more of an open-ended that anybody could come at any time and not in a limited fashion?
Well, thank you, Councilmember White. I will have Mr. Eric Dodd answer your question.
Hi, good evening. This is Eric Dodd with AE2S. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Councilmember White, for the question. So in regards to the access on the property, the Corps can confirm this as well, but these sites are along the Red River, which, as everybody here is familiar, is considered a navigable waterway, which means we can traverse up and down with boats. And the monitoring that will be done is best done from the boat. And so access will primarily be along the river, and then the surveyors that are doing the studies will park the boat on the edge of the river. They'll walk up the riverbank. They'll collect their samples. At some sites, there may be a survey monument that gets placed above the ordinary high water mark, and the surveyors will want to access that monument. And then once they're done with their surveying at that site, they'll go back down the riverbank, get back in their boat, and then continue, upstream or downstream along the river to the next monitoring site. And so the access to the properties is primarily done by boat. There are a few locations where the requested right of entry will include an access point to the river, but most of those access points are along public rights of way, from a road or that sort of thing where there's easier access to the road. So hopefully that provides you a little bit of explanation about the access to the site. Happy to answer any additional questions.
My question was the notification. So, for instance, let's just imagine my child is having their wedding in our yard, okay, right next to the river. And, during the wedding, you show up to do some measurement. Will you be letting people know ahead of time? This is, even if it's in a time span, that, during this week, we'll be out gathering data. Do they get any information once that you have permission to access, to enter their land.
Yeah, this is Eric again. I can respond to that. Thanks for the question again. The monitoring that will be done on site there'll be advance notice. Typically, we give at least 48 hours, but in some indications, if the property owners request more advance notice, that's certainly been something we're agreeable to. We certainly understand that there's, livestock, there's hunting, there's weddings, there's all sorts of other issues or uses of the property. This access easement is not intended to interrupt any of those uses. And so if there is a conflict with the time, the full intention is to be flexible with those property owners as they use their own property. And the monitoring that will be done will take place over several days or weeks across the entire geography. And so if there is a wedding, for example, that's happening in the backyard, the monitoring survey team should be able to access other sites, maybe different locations along the river, and come back and do this site perhaps after the wedding is done, for example.
Is that any other follow-up, Councilmember White? Okay. All right. Thank you, Councilmember White, Mr. Dodds. I'll pass it over to Councilmember Seljevold.
Yep. Mr. Paulson, thank you for the background information you gave me in the call. And, my experience being on the river as a kayaker and a canoeist, my understanding is that most of these monitors are going to be, or markers are going to be in the kind of the riparian area of the forest. These people might be able to walk in there, walk out, and they wouldn't even know that you were there. But we did get a letter from Mr. Ness. And did you get it, Mr. Paulson, did you get a chance to read that also?
I did, Councilmember Seljevold.
Well, I kind of get the impression, as being a landowner 3 hours away, that the meetings and the notices were very much kind of an inconvenience to him. And I'm just wondering, is there going to be another effort to reach out to him? Maybe, not inconvenience him, but maybe inconvenience you as far as you make the three-hour trip, or he, because it sounds like he just kind of was, it was just too far to come. It was inconvenienced, and maybe, or he put it off because he was busy. He was in the tax business. I mean, to me, it made sense that that might put it off. Your reaction to that?
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Seljevold. Yes, I did review the letter. I did pull our communication log for Mr. Ness. Our land agent that has been employed through MCCJPA has tried to reach out on 7 different occasions and left voice messages for a callback, and did not hear anything from Mr. Ness. We did also provide Mr. Ness with multiple certified mailings that were received, and we had documentation of that. And in those letters, it was requested that we would meet to discuss the rights of entry, as well as the follow-up calls that were indicated and unanswered. We certainly, as Eric had mentioned, Mr. Dodds had mentioned before, we are committed to being flexible in trying to meet landowners, but we also need two-way communication, and sometimes that is hard to establish. And we certainly would send a representative to Sioux Falls to meet with Mr. Ness if we could arrange a time and date and place to do that. In reading through Mr. Ness's letter, I believe a majority of his questions and concerns could be rectified in a discussion, or additional information provided to Mr. Ness to clarify exactly what we were intending the right of entry to be, and how that interplays with some of his questions. And so even though we're requesting this resolution of necessity from the City of Moorhead tonight, We will certainly continue to reach out and communicate with Mr. Ness and try to work with him to find a resolution to his concerns.
Yeah, we appreciate that because, like Councilperson Duran said, it kind of makes us look like the bully flexing their muscle to get onto your property, and we don't need that image. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Seljefold. I'm going to pass it over. I think next up is Councilmember Dahlquist, then Councilmember Lindas, and then Councilmember Duran. So, Councilmember Dahlquist.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say I agree with Councilmember Duran and Councilmember Seljevold that we do come across as a bully. I think it would be up to Wilkin County or else Clay County to work with Wilkin County, but I don't believe that the city of Moorhead should be flexing their muscle to make people allow others to get on their land. That was just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Dahlquist. Councilmember Lindas.
So I guess I have a couple questions also in terms of, I guess one of the first questions, I don't know if Engineer Williams or Mr. Dodd could answer is, if you had to collect data points beforehand, didn't you have to have right-of-way access, and what happened to that if you were collecting that data? And actually, the second part of that question possibly is clarifying Councilor White's question about kind of access. What is the frequency of access to these sites? Is this something that has to be done every week, or?
Thank you, Councilmember Linda. I can handle this question unless Ms. Terry Williams would like to add to it. Typically, we are asking for rights of entry on 3 to 5 different occasions. Typically, we'll have somebody first assess the site, and then they'll come and do the survey and place a monument on the site. And then the environmental scientists will come and do the biotic and geomorphic sampling. We would anticipate three site visits. Typically, the site visits are very minimal in time, and we are just requesting this time in order to that we need to create that pre-project baseline. That maybe will provide you a little context as to the amount and frequency that we will be impacting the property owner.
So are you talking 3 access times in 1 year, or I guess clarification in terms of how much? And then kind of going back to this sounds like then these sites have been part of the pre-monitoring project. And if not,
that's correct.
Is there any flexibility of where they can go?
William, answer that again. I don't think so, but I'll let her clarify. I'll respond to your question. So this would be one round of monitoring is what we're requesting now to complete that baseline analysis. We want to continue to work with the landowner because eventually, once the project is complete, we will have to continue to do monitoring in the future at that time. And so at that point, hopefully we can come to an agreement for access with the landowner. But this motion and resolution tonight is for the rights of entry for this year to place the monument and get the that is to move forward with additional project construction. And so, Ms. Williams, if you would like to answer the question of if this could be moved at this time,
Yeah, this is Terry Williams. Again, in order to establish an excellent baseline for this project, it's very important to go back to the same sites that we have visited before. And we are always very careful to access properties that we do have access to. We are as respectful to property and property owners as possible, and we do not enter properties that we don't have access to. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess, you know, one of the questions is I'm hoping that we're going to hear from other property owners, perhaps, but from the one letter that Mr. Timothy Ness sent, it really sounds like further outreach to that individual can avoid essentially being the bully, which I don't want to be in this situation. So I guess the last question I have for this is really, what is the time scale on this? If we were to wait, if we were to table this and wait to do something until next meeting, that would give you more time to reach out to property owners. What is your time scale?
Thank you, Council Member Linda. I'll have Mr. Eric Dodd discuss that.
Yeah, good evening. Thanks for the comment and question. You know, the Corps is aiming to get as many, well, to get all of these rights of entry secured as soon as possible so that they can continue with contracting for their monitoring crews and get them up here to start doing the monitoring this year. I think Terry can comment on the exact time frame of that. You know, we're certainly interested or willing and able to continue to reach out to Mr. Ness and try to have more conversations with him, perhaps, you know, visit to Sioux Falls if it's, you know, not busy tax season right now. Keep in mind, as Mr. Paulson mentioned, you know, there have been numerous attempts to reach out to Mr. Ness, including those attempts by the MCCJPA as well as attempts from the Buffalo Red Watershed District. And so you know, in some situations, there's a lack of communication that results in, you know, something not being signed. In other situations, there's, you know, just, you know, concerns and opposition, frankly, from property owners unwilling to do this. And so we've run across all those situations. As I think the information in your packet indicated, there's approximately 400 parcels across the area where we are seeking these types of access agreements. To date, we have been able to secure 330 or more of those access agreements. And so a lot of those access agreements have been secured by, you know, back and forth communication with the property owners. And so in times like this, when we've tried numerous attempts to reach out and we haven't been able to actually contact with the property owner, it does get a little bit discouraging at times. So if any of the council members have suggestions or ideas on how best to contact Mr. Ness, we'd certainly accept those. I was pleased to hear that he did respond after he was aware that this topic was going to be discussed tonight. And so perhaps that's the door opening that we need to have some additional discussions.
Just for the council's information, this is Chris McShane. The statute requires that we send each landowner a notice, and that's actually served on them. So there's not a chance of it getting lost in the mail. There's not a chance of them minimizing it. This is a document that is served upon them saying that entry needs to take place. It provides another copy of the right of entry agreement that has been sent to them before. It provides them contact information for their land agent so that if they have any questions, they can get those answered. It's the statutes and the Minnesota legislature's attempt to make sure that the landowners know that this is actually happening, and we want you to be as informed as possible. So just by passing this resolution tonight, it wouldn't be the end of the story. It wouldn't be an automatic, we're going to court. It would be that first step, which is serving a notice on these landowners and giving one last attempt to do that.
Thank you, Mr. McShane. I know I don't want to belabor the point, Mayor, but we could have Mr. Eric Dodds to let the council know exactly how we reached out to this property owner. The outreach was extensive and it was documented, and we can provide those dates and times of phone calls, and that kind of that to the council, so they of how we've attempted to try to contact this landowner, but have been unfortunately unsuccessful in this case.
No, thank you. Let me, I'll have some comments, but let me pass it over. I think I wrote this down. So Councilmember Dahlquist, you had a hand up and now it's down. Did you want to be heard on this again? I had you next up.
No, Mayor.
Okay.
Thanks.
And then Councilmember Seldrevold, you also had a hand up, and now I see that it's down, so I'm just going down the list. Do you wish to be heard again?
No.
Okay. Then it would go to Councilmember Durand. I see your hand up, and then after you, I have Councilmember White and a Councilmember Carlson. So Councilmember Durand, if you wish to be heard.
Mr. Mayor, yeah, I have, okay, I'd like to touch on a couple inconsistencies that I noticed. One, we were told that these sites were already used 10 years ago in 2010 to acquire some baseline, or they were historic parcels. And we just heard now that these sites, we want to access them to establish baseline. Well, if there has been no baseline with these 5 parcels, why do we insist on using them in establishing a baseline if there's no baseline? Okay, if there's no baseline, then why can't we move on and exclude them or use 5 other sites? We've heard that we don't want to use 5 other sites, we can't use 5 other sites. We've heard that out of 400 and some sites, there are over 300 that are being used. So why are 5 parcels that are properties that belong to a property owner who has rights, why are we focusing on these 5? Why don't we just bypass them and let that property owner have their right to say no? Second, we were told that this is not eminent domain. And I understand that, no, we're not seizing property, but we're taking away property rights. And from my understanding, that eminent domain applies not just to taking over a property or to seizing a property, it refers to seizing a property owner's rights. So I'd like some clarification on that. And lastly, I guess it goes back to my previous comment as, you know, what if we just leave these 5 property owners out? If we can't find 5 different sites, why can't we just leave them out and use the 400 or the 300 and some other sites that the Diversion Authority has acquired property rights acquisition, or, you know, property access to? I don't know why we're so heck bent on getting access to these 5 sites when we don't have any baseline, and clearly there are hundreds of other sites that we can use. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Durant. I'll defer to who wishes to answer the question. Since Mr. Shockley is right next to me, visible, and he's ready to respond, I will give the floor to him. And then if anyone else wants to follow, just state your name and your comment.
Yeah, so I'll defer to the technical team on the technical questions, but with regards to the eminent domain question, so under eminent domain law, you would take a property interest, a permanent property interest, whether that's an easement or fee simple, that is eminent domain. The state legislature has called out a separate section that allows right of access, which is a temporary get on the property to perform tests. It is not deemed to be an eminent domain action because it's just temporary, it's a test. It's just the state legislature allows it by statute. It's different than eminent domain because you're not actually taking a property interest. You are accessing their property, and you do have to provide some limited compensation for if there's any damage done to the property. But the state legislature, along I think with most states, allows some limited access to the property for surveying, for testing, for environmental checks. And the idea is that to get onto a property to determine if the property would be needed in the future or if there's tests related to the project, but it's not the same thing as eminent domain under the statutory authority. So that's the difference. And I would defer to the technical folks on the more technical questions that were raised, because I don't know what the answers to those are.
Thank you, Mr. Shockley. So we'll defer if anyone from the technical side wishes to speak, and then Councilmember Duran can kind of piggyback if she has any follow-up.
Mayor Judd, this is Terry Williams again. So the 5 sites that we're talking about are located along the Red River, and they were selected due to their location on the Red River and their location with respect to the project. The project features such as the southern embankment and the upstream staging area. And these sites are especially vital because they are located somewhat at the upstream end of where this project might have impacts. And so moving them or going to a different spot is not really feasible and goes against how we selected these sites in the first place, which was in consultation with our natural resource agency partners and our geomorphology experts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak on that aspect?
Yeah, can I just, I just want to ask real quick, what would happen if those 5 sites are left out? I mean, is that going to kill the project? Is that going to make things trickier? Is that gonna, what are the ramifications if those 5 sites are left out?
This is Terry Williams again. Then our pre-project information would be incomplete. And then our post-project information would be incomplete as well and not reliable. Not as reliable as it could be if we had more surveys on these parcels. Over.
Does that answer your question, Councilmember Duran?
For now.
Okay. No, that's fine. I just want to make sure because I got a few other hands up. So if you need some time to marinate on it, we'll come back. So I'll go down. So after you, I had Councilmember White, Carlson, Hendrickson, and then we'll go with that. So Councilmember White.
I just want to continue on the question that Councilmember Duran just had. If those 5 sites were excluded, A, could it endanger the project from moving ahead? And or B, could it create a potential for public harm? So could there be a possibility that, say there was some environmental impact and you weren't able to gather the data to determine that, could that then result in and harm to our waterway or other property because you wouldn't be able to gather accurate data?
Were those folks able to hear that? Because we couldn't hear the first part of the question. I think there's still a mic issue, Councilmember White. Whoever was able to hear that, if you care to respond, or you can have Councilmember White restate the question.
I can restate it. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so 2 questions. One, if those 5 properties were left out, could that endanger the project from moving ahead? In other words, could it potentially mean that the diversion project couldn't go forward? And or B, could it lead to harm to, in other ways, to the other public harm? So for instance, could it result in, if there were environmental impacts, such as something polluting in the water or, or soil erosion, that because we wouldn't be able to gather the data, it's not just impacting those individual property owners, that it would have the potential, if you're unable to gather the data, that it could result in harm to a larger group than just those individual properties.
Thank you, Councilmember White. One will wish to respond to that?
Ms. Williams or Mr. Den, would you have a response for Councilmember White?
This is Terry Williams. Not having the 5 properties would put us in a lesser position to honor our commitments. So both the Corps of Engineers and the Diversion Authority are committed to identifying and mitigating the impacts of this project. And having these 5 parcels in addition to the other 300 will put us in a much better position to identify potential impacts caused by this project. Over.
Okay. Thank you. Any other responses to that? Okay, hearing none, we'll go on to Councilmember Carlson, Hendrickson, and then Councilmember Lindas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Similarly to what Mr. Paulson had said about not belaboring the point of the outreach that was done with these particular landowners, I did just want to bring up the fact that this particular landowner did receive the packet of information that explained all of the right of entry, what would be expected as far as the number of times access would be made onto their property, and the fact that that the monuments are going to be fairly small and insignificant actually on the land. That this individual actually received and signed for all of this packet of information back in December, and since that time there's been about 7 other phone calls and messages left each time for this particular landowner, and each time this landowner has not responded whatsoever to the diversion, to even have a conversation, to have some of his concerns and his questions addressed. So I think that that's important to bring out, similarly to the fact that all the other landowners had the same information given to them and had no issue and no problem connecting with representatives of the Diversion Authority to have their questions addressed. Also in the packet that we received, just so the members of the public have at least a visual of what these quote unquote monuments look like. I know when I first heard that term monument, I thought of a concrete pole about 2 or 3 feet tall and at least 6 to 8 inches in diameter. And that's not at all what these look like. They're barely not intrusive on the land. And I don't know if anybody at City Hall can even pull up a picture of that, what these monuments look like, but you know, these are things that really is in the best interest of the landowner to be able to get this information. So further on down the road, if there are things that are drastically changed on their land, that they're going to be adequately compensated for it. They're also compensated for the actual right of entry once that's secured, and it is for a limited amount of time.
Thank you, Councilmember Carlson. The next up, we'll have Councilmember Hendrickson and then Lindas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Carlson took a lot of my thunder there, but, and I wanted to reiterate what Joel said. It's essentially a checks and balance between the FM diversion and the landowner. And I think it's, if I'm not wrong, Mr. Paulson, it's more to protect the landowner than anything, because, you know, you never know what's going to happen with the project. And I think is it safe to say that it's good for the river too, if we do have these monuments, and it's good for the land around the river? Is that fair to say, Joel?
Absolutely, Mr. Hendrickson. And so you're right on, and I'll reiterate, this is a check and balance. This is to ensure that the diversion authority is not impacting a landowner and unmitigating or not providing some sort of retribution to meet the requirements that we're intending to commit to. You know, we're not taking our obligations lightly whatsoever. You know, to implement a project of this magnitude and this importance, we need to meet all federal requirements and state requirements, and we're committed to do that. And we've taken an extensive effort to come up with a mitigation plan that goes above and beyond those federal and state requirements, in fact. And so this is one small area of the regulatory requirements that we need to meet, but certainly a very important one for the environment. You know, we want to ensure that we can monitor and figure out if we're having unintended consequences to the environment, to biological species, and that if we are, we can change course and figure out how to mitigate for those potential negative effects. So this is all about protecting the environment. This really, you know, this aspect of it is not related to building any project elements, you know, directly, but it's really dealing with the potential indirect aspect of those elements on the environment, and making sure that we have a good handle on the data for the baseline. And you know, as you can see, 425 parcels, it's an extremely extensive and robust environmental monitoring program. And as Ms. Williams had mentioned as well, it will provide us the sound data that we need to be able to quantify impacts in the future if they're seen. And I think that's a pretty important thing to be able to do. Without the data, we can't quantify those, and unintended consequences would go unmitigated. And so it's really a big, heavy lift responsibility that we're trying to meet in relation to our program. And hopefully that provides some context to your question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Paulson. But yeah, to me, it's a protection for the landowner. It's a protection for the FM diversion. It's a checks and balance, and it's very good for the environment. So I think it's a good thing. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Hendrickson. Before I pass it over to Councilmember Lindas and also Duran, I just want to make a record for the folks at home real briefly. That the reason why I was not sitting at the dais a couple moments is because I was having Madam City Clerk pull up a picture because there were questions about what this monument looks like. So we're working to pull up a picture for those folks so they can see what the monument looks like, so those folks at home can see what this is. And to quote Councilmember Carlson, this isn't some 6'8", stone thing that's going to sit in your backyard. A picture of the monument is now up on the screen, which should be able to be streamed so folks can take a look at it. And specifically, it is literally where the picture is of the person wearing a red hat, where it has placing a monument language there. So just want to make that record why I wasn't sitting here 2 times in the last 3 minutes. And with that, I'll pass it over to Councilmember Lindas.
Thank you, Mayor Judd. I guess in many ways, just to reiterate what my prior council members said, this is really something that's not just protecting the existing landowner, it's protecting all the landowners along the river. So, there is this essence you have to balance between individual property owners' rights, but also all the rest of the property owners. So I find myself conflicted because this is something that is definitely really needed in terms of monitoring the river. However, I also don't like to unnecessarily impinge on property owners' rights. So I guess one of the questions I have has to do with, you have 2 sides of the river. Can you actually put this monument on the other side of the river and for the purposes of monitoring and identifying the location of your collection site? And then the next question really has to do with kind of the rule of thumb. Sometimes you end up spending 90% of your time on 10% of the people, and maybe it's even more than that. But communication is difficult sometimes, and I understand that after you get to a certain point, you're serving people with certified letters and making sure that they receive the communication. But is that possible to do before you actually have to result in legal action? So I guess those are the 2 questions I have.
Can I, before those questions get answered, I just want to clarify one thing. I haven't had a chance to speak on this, and I know that Councilmember Durand, let me make sure I make my note here, Durand and then Hendrickson also have questions. For those folks that are questioning whether or not sufficient outreach has been made and the significance of that, I mean, again, you can pull up the letter that Mr. Ness sent, and we could potentially read this into the record, but I mean, I've highlighted, significant text where it is readily apparent that he has been contacted more than a few times, so he knows what's going on. I mean, short of having someone from the diversion project drive to Sioux Falls, knock on the door, and try to have a conversation, which probably wouldn't be feasible, because apparently he has that right not to open his door should somebody come knocking on it. So, I mean, my point is, if you look at the letter, he states in paragraph 1, "It is my guess," and I'm quoting, "that you want me to address why I did not sign the right of entry for my Wilkin County property." So he's acknowledging that he's received it. And he's also stating in the very next sentence that there was a caller who invited him to speak tonight to address the council, but he wanted his statement to be read as a part of the meeting, and he's ready to sit by his phone when and if the council has any further questions. He's stating that he has not received much communication, and he quotes from any of the tentacles of the diversion project. So he's probably, not only that I feel, I can go throughout this letter to show that he's been informed of what he has received and all the information, but looking objectively, it seems that he already has made a subjective viewpoint about how he feels about folks infringing on his property. So even though there has been, based on what I'm hearing, at least 7 attempts to contact him, if you read later in the letter, he and his spouse requested a meeting with the Buffalo Red Watershed District. This is last May. So it seems to me that he absolutely has a right not to speak to anyone from the diversion project, but I think to say that these folks need to do more, when if you read through this letter pretty strictly, I mean, he has received all these communications. It just may be looking like that he does not want to respond specifically to the folks from the diversion project. So my question globally is that what do you do? What more can you do if you have an individual who's received the communications? We've heard from folks that they've followed the law. They've sent certified mailings. I don't want to put words in his mouth, because we can most certainly call him up and figure out why he chose not to respond, but he has chosen not to respond. So then my question is, moving forward, for those that have the question of what do we do next, or what more outreach can you do, I would agree. I'd like to hear what more do you think the project needs to do to communicate. And again, it is his right to say no. I think apparently if you scroll down to the very last paragraph, or second to last paragraph, he's saying no. He's the last sentence of the last, second to last paragraph on the third page, I am choosing not to participate at this time. And then his next sentence is, surely the arms of the diversion can find other testing spots for its work should they be permitted. So moving on, if we're going to talk about lack of notice, lack of information, you got to do more. I like to hear some practical application of what does this look like moving forward. So with that, I'll pass it over to, I think, Councilmember Duran. I see your hand up. Unless somebody wants to respond first, to Councilmember Lindas's questions.
Okay, well, hearing none, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll jump in. To comment on your remarks, I don't know that communication and outreach is the issue right now. And when we're focusing too much time on one person, when there are 5 parcels that either didn't respond or said no. So I think to try to focus our attention all on just this being on the shoulders of one person is wrong. And something else that I think is wrong is that it's arrogant for us to say, well, this is in a property owner's best interest, or this is in their neighbor's best interest. That's kind of like, it reminds me of when somebody says, well, don't be offended, or you shouldn't be upset. Well, if a person is offended or if a person is upset, who is anybody else to say that they shouldn't be? If a property owner wants to exercise their property rights, that is their right. And that's the moral argument that I see and that I'm focused on. You all, many of you know me well. I am very much an environmentalist. I'm very concerned about the environment, our river. I've advocated for reducing phosphorus. That's not the issue. We have over 300 sites that have been secured in order to protect the river, to protect the environment. Why we want to infringe on the rights of 5 parcels is beyond me. I don't get it. Why can't we just leave them alone, let them exercise their rights as property owners, and move on? We don't even have a baseline yet. It was said by Mr. Paulson and Ms. Williams, we don't have a baseline yet. We need access to get a baseline. So if we don't even have a baseline yet, why are we insisting that we have these 5 sites? It doesn't make sense to me. I'm supporting the right of the landowner at this point in time, landowners, I should say. And it's not because I don't care about the environment or I don't care about protecting the neighbors. It's infringing on a property owner's rights, and that's where I stand. And I hope everybody else on the council can see that you don't have to be for or against the project to understand and to see that this is a right of those 5 parcel owners. It's a violation of their rights to say no. You can like the project, you can hate the project. When it comes down to it, Moorhead, the city of Moorhead does not have the right, in my opinion, to violate property owners' rights in a completely different county. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Duran. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak on this? I will say, to your point, Councilmember Duran, I respectfully disagree about the fact that this isn't about also communication and outreach. I think I know that this project can evoke passion on both sides. But again, I think it's kind of a microcosm of what's going on in today's society. I think we should be doing more communication. I think we should be doing more outreach so we can create a better understanding of what's going on. And this is just on topics galore. It's not just specifically with the diversion project, but I think what it comes down to is I don't necessarily disagree with you that this is a tough decision that we all have to make here this evening. And of course, I think everybody that is a part of this group doesn't like the fact that there's the potential of infringing on people's property rights. But I think all of this stuff is just not in a vacuum. I think if folks would engage in a two-way conversation and outreach and sit down at the table and talk, we probably would have a better understanding of what's all going on right now. So I think I think it's all a part of a piece of the pie, the whole of the pie. I mean, I think communication, outreach, and these rights all kind of go hand in hand. But with that, I'll pass it over to Councilmember Lindas.
I guess I understand Councilmember Duran's point of view, and I appreciate it quite a bit. I do kind of think, though, that one of the aspects of the monitoring process is something that's going to be a benefit to everyone involved in making sure the project doesn't have negative impact. I look at it more as a issue of, you have to get your children vaccinated to go to school to protect the rest of the kids. Although people can opt out of that, that's to the detriment of the greater community. And so that's how I look at this, and that's why I'm conflicted, because I'm also, in someone that supports environmental issues, and so this looks to me like an environmental monitoring project that's necessary for the diversion project to make sure it doesn't have negative impacts, or at least if it does have negative impacts, you can identify them. So I guess I go back to the big question: if these locations in the river are important, why can't we put the monument on the other side of the river? Because what's important is the location of the monitoring in the river. Most of the data is collected from the river, and even potentially erosion and other issues can be done from the river, and you don't need to get onto that property owner's property.
Thank you, Councilmember Lindas. Can someone answer that question, please?
Yes,
Mayor
Mr.
Judd, this
Mayor,
is Terry.
thank
I can give it a shot.
Yeah.
Councilmember Linda, to your question, the 5 properties that we're talking about are Timothy Ness's property. The cross-section that the surveys are taken on extends across the river, so it's on both sides of the river, Minnesota and North Dakota. And the access on the North Dakota side has been gained across the river from the Ness property. So we've already got access on the North Dakota side, and we're asking for access on the Minnesota side so that we can complete these cross sections that go across the river and up over the banks. And the map that I'm looking at, it appears that the monuments, we already are going to locate them on the North Dakota side of the cross section. Does that help? Over.
Yeah, that clarifies quite a bit that you're doing a cross-sectional survey, which makes more sense. And so you're just asking if the property owner should be able to get out of the boat to be able to access the land a little teeny bit onto that person's property. Or
Yeah, correct. So they would pull the boat up to the cross-sectional site. Our survey crew would go out probably this spring, summer to do the cross-sectional survey and set the monument on the North Dakota side. And then our geomorphology contractor, who's a national expert, would follow in their boat, go to the cross-section site, and then do their sampling along that cross-section on both the North Dakota side and the Minnesota side at that site. And we have multiple cross-sections planned for Mr. Ness's property, but it looks like the monuments would all be set on the North Dakota side from this preliminary map. Over.
Mr. Linda, we can't hear you. I think you're muted.
I clicked the wrong button.
That's okay.
Yeah, so I appreciate that information. That actually helps quite a bit to clarify the process. You know, I guess it still goes to the point of whether or not you can't move those by, you know, a little bit. I understand it would probably be also moving the North Dakota side. In certain situations, it sounds like a lot of the questions that Mr. Ness had, you've actually answered to us. I wish that we had him on the phone because then he would be able to also understand. Again, it is, I think, a lot of communication needs to go back and forth. And I would hope that we could actually, you know, in that particular case, and at this point you are looking at particular cases, you're down to just a few, you know, extraordinary communication methods might be needed. And I guess what I'm not as aware of is, you know, what has happened. So that makes it hard for me to understand. And I definitely understand where you know, Mr. Neff seems to have come from his letter. That it just sounds like he was confused about a lot of things. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you, Councilmember Lindos. Councilmember Carlson, White, then Hendrickson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I just wanted to just address the questions that have come up about, you know, there's 300 other places that this type of information is going to be taken from, so why do we absolutely need these 5 parcels? And I guess the analogy that I've always thought of is if, you know, I have farmers in my family that have cattle, and if you just take out a little bit of the fence around them, or if you just leave the gate open, then you have issues and problems. And I think in order to ensure the integrity of this environmental project and the research that's being done, you need to have all of the parcels involved. And they didn't, like Ms. Williams spoke to, they didn't look at the specific parcels. They looked at the environment and where the land or where the river was going. So they looked at it from a scientific point of view, not who owned the land. And so I tend to fall back on the fact that this is an environmental scientific study, and you have to have all the parcels participating, otherwise the integrity is going to be lost.
Thank you, Councilmember Carlson. We'll go to Councilmember White, then Hendrickson, yep, Councilmember White.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to thank my fellow council members and our guests just for having the opportunity to really have a deep deliberation, because it is a very difficult issue, and I appreciate all of Councilmember Duran's comments. And it's not as if it's the first time we have had to think about things like this. I think about in my ward when I've had folks call me at my house to ask why we have an eminent domain to take some of the houses that turned down buyout offers. And, you know, and there's those, I remember sitting at a guy's house who had turned one down, and he talked about this was the place that he had raised his kids, and he showed me where he created a path down to the river for his grandkids, and the idea of tearing him out of his home would be just heart-wrenching, you know. And so I think every time we have something like this, we need to really take the time. We need to take it very seriously. And in this case, though, this is a different example. I mean, you know, we're talking about something where I think there is a strong case that there is clearly a public benefit with very minimal impact on individuals. We're not kicking people out of their homes. We're not even preventing them from using their property. It wouldn't prevent people from, if there's cropland, I know they said they wouldn't impact on that. They could use it for their enjoyment. We're talking about very minimal. It's, you know, to me, it's kind of similar to somebody coming to read your meter, you know? And so in that case, you know, I could see for the case to be made that the public benefit far outweighs the minimal impact it would have on the people who would be affected.
Thank you.
But I also want, that's my last thing that I should want to say is, I just think making sure that we are using this as an absolute last resort.
Thank you, Councilmember White. So we have Councilmember Hendrickson, then Dahlquist, and then unless anyone else wishes to chime in, I think we can probably wrap it up unless Councilmember Duran, just want to be fair, unless you have any final remarks, we can probably wrap this up within the next 7 minutes. So we'll go with Councilmember Hendrickson, then Dahlquist.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll make this real quick. I just want to reiterate that it is a non-intrusive process. I've worked on a survey crew before, and we went trompsing all over the place, you know, putting in property pins. This is done by boat. It's the most non-intrusive process I've seen with a river staking. So, and then I do agree with Councilmember Lindas. I still think we need to make every attempt to get in touch with Mr. Ness and just explain what's going on and answer any questions he has. So I think, yeah, like Mr. Paulson said, we could travel down to Sioux Falls and have a meeting there. So, or the FN diversion could. So, but just to reiterate, yeah, this is a very non-intrusive process, and it is for the greater good. It is for the environment. So I am going to support it. Thanks.
Councilmember Dahlquist.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't believe anyone is disagreeing that this isn't important, but what we're voting on is whether Moorhead will force people in Wilkin County to do what we want them to do. And like you had said, that the conversation between, communication is the best way to solve this problem. And I don't believe that Moorhead should be using this power move to force people in Wilkin County to do something they don't want to do. And that's, I agree with Councilmember Durand. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Dahlquist. Councilmember Hendrickson, I think I still see your hand up. Is that a new hand or is that the old hand?
I forgot to put it down, I'm sorry.
No, that's not a problem at all. Okay, 8:25 is it, and I would like to cut it off in 5 minutes. Does anyone else have any other questions? I do appreciate the passionate conversations going back and forth. This is a big deal. I don't know if this has happened before, where a city council from Moorhead has had to do this. So I think you're absolutely correct, and I would agree with Councilmember White that obviously, if this is going to be done, I think it should be a last resort. I mean, this is a big deal, and I know that this is something that shouldn't be taken lightly. So I do appreciate the dialogue. Councilmember Lindos, I see your hand up.
Yes, I kind of asked this question before, but I don't think I ever got an answer, which is, what would be the effect on the project if we were to table this motion and bring it up next meeting for the vote, in terms of giving the authority, more chance to reach out and talk to people?
Mr. Paulson, do you know if there's anyone from your side that wishes to answer that question?
I'll defer that question probably to Mr. Dodds. He is in charge of the land management program, and maybe he can comment on the extensive outreach that's occurred. I think this discussion has generally centered around Mr. Ness's property. However, we did receive notification from an adjacent property owner that basically indicated there was going to be no chance to be able to enter his property ever. And so I don't know how much more communication would help, especially in that case. So if it did help in Mr. Ness's case, I think that would be beneficial and positive. However, we do anticipate that we will not be able to acquire all of the rights of entry, and we would still need a resolution of necessity ultimately from the city of Moorhead to, as indicated by Ms. Williams, complete the baseline analysis and have that available in order to meet our environmental obligations to the feds and ultimately to the environment. And so maybe Mr. Dodds, if you could answer Councilmember Lindos's question there, and maybe specifically discuss the Ness or your process for engaging landowners.
Yeah, good evening. Eric Dodds here again. Thanks for the question. As we've talked here, I think there's been pretty thorough attempts to reach out to the property owners. In the case of Mr. Tim Ness, we did get this correspondence recently, in part because this topic was placed on the agenda. As Mr. McShane noted earlier, even if the council would approve the resolution tonight, there is additional attempts, from this point forward to reach out to him, and we won't stop trying to negotiate a voluntary signing of those rights of entry. In terms of whether or not a 1-month delay would, hamper the Corps' program, it's my understanding that the Corps is really planning to begin their contracting for this process here in the next few weeks, and they're wanting to shore up as many, if not all, of these rights of entries as possible. And so I guess, every right of entry that we can get secured helps us further, the data necessary to establish the baselines and whatnot, as has been talked about earlier tonight. And then I would just echo Mr. Paulson's comment. You know, we do have 5 parcels that we have not been able to obtain rights of entries on. Those 5 parcels are owned by 4 different property owners. We do have some additional correspondence from one of the other Ness properties, Mr. David Ness, and he's been very unequivocal. He is not planning to sign his rights of entry one way or another. And so in his situation, more communication is clearly not going to help, unfortunately. And I guess that's, you know, something that we've certainly tried and reached out to him as well. And so I guess I would just echo what Mr. Paulson said, that if we try further with Mr. Timothy Ness, we may, you know, be able to have some dialogue with him. That dialogue could continue through the court, you know, pre-court process with the service notice that Mr. McShane mentioned. But there are a few property owners that it doesn't appear that any additional communication is going to help matters.
Does that answer your question, Councilmember? Okay. We didn't hear you because I think you're muted, but I see you nodding in the
I was
affirmative.
nodding my head.
Okay.
This is not a good situation.
I respect that, Councilmember Lindos. We're 8:31. I see Councilmember Duran, you have your hand up.
Just one last comment. I'll make it brief. As Mr. Dodd said, it's not just Mr. Timothy Ness. It's other parcels as well who have come flat out and said, no, I don't want you on my property. So, and that is in Wilkin County. Keep this in mind, people. This is in Wilkin County, not even in Clay County, not even in the city of Moorhead, where the city of Moorhead is going to look at those property owners and say, I don't care that what you say, I don't care that you said no, we're gonna enter your property anyway. That's what this comes down to, is the city of Moorhead exerting authority where we don't have authority. We shouldn't have authority, I should say, even though we supposedly do, to take away property owners' rights. I'm so happy to be able to vote no on this because it is wrong. It's their rights, and we're taking it away. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm ready to vote, and hopefully some of my comments have resonated.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Duran. Councilmember Carlson, is that a new hand or an old hand?
That is a new hand, Mr. Mayor.
All right, let's, we're a little bit past where I wanted to end, but we'll finish it up. You're last.
Well, I was going to make a move to grant the resolution of necessity from the city of Moorhead for biotic and geomorphic right of entries in Wilkin County with the addendum of the diversion authority to reach out one more time to Mr. Ness, possibly even a trip down to his residence to try and address his questions specifically. And that would be my motion.
Mrs. Hendrickson, I'll second that motion.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none, Madam Clerk, will you please take a roll call vote?
Shelley Dahlquist.
All right, could you repeat what we are passing here? What Councilmember Carlson stated we are voting on? So we're not voting on what is on the agenda, but we're changing it?
We are.
Councilmember Carlson, forgive me if I don't articulate your motion. My understanding is your motion is to pass the resolution as stated. However, you wish to add that the diversion authority makes one more attempt to communicate with specifically Mr. Ness. And again, there's 4 other property owners, but you're just specifying your motion only to Mr. Ness.
That is correct, just due to the fact that he specifically sent us a letter and the additional comments from Mr. Dodds about that the other landowners unequivocally stated that they would not be interested in further conversations.
Okay. So that motion has been made and seconded. Before we move forward, Mr. Attorney, City Attorney, Mr. Ness did state in his letter that he wishes to have his letter made a part of the record. It is 3 pages. We've been talking on this topic for quite some time, but I do want to respect the wishes of the author. Is there a way to just incorporate this in some capacity as a part of the record so that if individuals wanted to read it, they can have access to it?
Yeah, certainly. I think the letter has been, all of the main points of the letter have been addressed tonight, and so the letter can just be attached to the meeting minutes.
Okay, thank you. I would greatly appreciate that, just to make a record clear and to the point. So motion's been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? And Councilmember Dahlquist, you have an understanding of what Councilmember Carlson's motion is?
I understand, and I am voting no.
Okay. Then we will, and just to be clear, City Attorney Shockley, how many votes do we need for this to pass?
You need a majority of the quorum, so either be 4 and yourself voting in a tie, or 5 council members.
Okay, all right. Madam City Clerk, roll call vote, please.
Watson Curry?
Yes.
Carlson?
I had my hand.
We didn't hear you, Councilmember Carlson.
Yes.
Durand?
No.
White?
Yes.
I didn't. I'm sorry, was that affirmative or negative? I'm sorry.
Yes.
I think she said pass.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, okay.
I said yes.
Thank you.
Seldrevold?
Yes.
Hendrickson?
Yes.
Lindos?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes.
Motion passes. Again, I know this was a passionate topic. I do appreciate everyone's input and discussion on this. I know it's a tough call, but I appreciate the dialogue. Then we'll move on to agenda item number 22, Mayor and Council reports. The council member wishes to report anything for the good of the order this evening? Councilmember Watson Curry. Or, no, I saw a hand, yes?
Yep,
Okay.
sorry.
No, that's okay.
Just needed. I simply wanted to raise people's awareness. There's been a lot of interest in local foods, and certainly our current situation has raised a lot of concerns about food access and stability. And the Cass Clay Food Partners has done a wonderful job of gathering and collecting information, what's happening in the various jurisdictions to support people in this time of need. They do a update at noon on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on their Facebook page, and there's just a whole lot of resources that they've compiled as far as what people are doing, how you can help, how you can access things. Additionally, what else you can do to support your own local food needs. One thing I did want to say is today I missed the presentation, but one of the notes they were talking about gardening efforts, and just to remind our residents that if they are digging, to please first call 811 or the gopher line. Just call before you dig, have your property marked to make sure that we don't have any unnecessary injuries due to catching a line. So I just wanted to share that, and that that's just a great resource of where people can put some energy and share if they have any additional treasure. And I also have not met for the MAP bus coordinating board for a while, but I did want to just express my gratitude to the drivers for our MAP bus service. I wave at them every chance I can and see them with their masks, and they're offering free rides at this time, and passengers are entering in the back to minimize contact for the drivers to keep our staff healthy. So I really appreciate their services, and of course, if you don't have to be going anywhere, please don't hop on the bus, but just greatly appreciate their service in this time of need. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Watson Curry. Any other council members have any updates or reports? Hearing none, I'll just briefly, we had our annual Board of Appeals and Equalization meeting last week. Thank you to city staff, Nathan Ockery and his staff, for putting that together. Thank you to the folks that serve on that board as well. We do appreciate your time. We had a lot of great discussion and dialogue, and again, had to make some tough decisions in that regard too, but we do appreciate the service of those folks, and also to the folks that were able to respond and chime in on our platform with the WebEx platform. That was also greatly appreciated as well. So I think other than that, weekly meetings with the COVID-19 will still take place. This next one will be coming up Wednesday at 11 a.m. They're all virtual now, so please feel free to check it out on the City of Fargo television. So other than that, I think that's all that I have, and I'll pass it over to Madam City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. City Council, I have two things. I'll be quick. The first one is the military banners that we started that project last year. If you recall, we've been asking for donations, and folks have been able to either buy a banner for a loved one, or they could call us if they want a banner, and we do have quite a pool of money at this point available to put up more banners. The first two are up. They went up just now. They are on Main Avenue and 4th Street, and we have light poles between 4th Street and 8th Street off Main. There will be 12 up. The first two went up, and there will be 12 total that we know of. But as I said, there is some money available. Our community has been very generous in donating to that. So if a family can't support or can't afford it or don't want to pay for it, just give us a name and ask us to put one up, and we'll be glad to recognize them. So drive by that, or walk by, either one, that Main Avenue and 4th Street, so you can see the banners, the two that are up. And the second thing is, and we will be doing a press release on that when all 12 get up, and thanking the community for their donations on that. They're very, very nice. The second thing I just wanted to report on is I'm often asked what we're doing to help our first responders, and how we're recognizing our essential staff and our critical staff, which basically is critical in the city. Our essential staff, by legal definition, is really our wastewater staff, public works, first responders, so fire and law enforcement. And so one thing we've been doing with law enforcement, and it started before the COVID-19, but it's been continuing through, is we've been offering training. We've hired some trainers who specialize in that field, and have invited their spouses to training. And we've paid for that as a city. It's an extra additional thing that we've tried to do to really show support and learn how to deal with the demands, or at least give them more tools to deal with the demands of their very difficult jobs. And we started to expand it to their families, to their spouses, to their loved ones, so they can participate. We're getting really great feedback on that. We did require the first one that all law enforcement employees attend, and then we, as an option, invited their spouses. The feedback was so good that we're gonna repeat it a couple times now, and we're going to extend it. So that's one thing we've done. Another thing we've done is, per the federal the Sick Leave Act, the Federal Sick Leave Act, first responders were not eligible for paid sick leave through the federal law, where the rest of the city employees were. So early April 1st, I sent out a memo to all employees who was eligible, et cetera. April 14th, I've revised it and added our essential staff, those first responders, the wastewater and the public works employees, that they can also take that paid leave. I deviated from the federal recommendations on that. So these folks would have that ability if they had a loved one who was exposed or was tested positive and they had to be in quarantine, someone in their family. There's 3 of the 5 categories that they can claim under. We've had our first 2 claims this week under that. So for law enforcement, so there's a couple things that we're doing. We're also supporting financially and in other ways the Tactical Guardian program through the police department, which is really helping with counseling services and education and training. In fact, one of the pastors sent a little video the other day. We had that difficult homicide last week, and sent a little video onto law enforcement staff, a 4-minute video, kind of talking about how to deal with the stresses of very difficult situations like that. And we circulated it around the police department. We're trying to support it however we can, and those were just some of the examples I wanted to share with the council that we're trying to assist where we can. So that's my report.
Thank you, Madam City Manager, and thank you again for your work with the staff and making sure everybody's nice, safe, and healthy, so appreciate that. Moving on, we don't have any new business, nor is there an executive session. Madam City Clerk, any citizens that wish to address the council, phone calls, emails, or any other communication means at this point?
None at this time.
Okay. Thank you, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Watson Curry, so moved.
Second.
Thank you, everyone, for the discussion, and we are adjourned. Good night, Moorhead.